You think the builders of the ancient world relied on armies of slaves and massive wooden cranes to move their stones. Armies of slaves and giant cranes weren't part of the equation. In 1923, a 5-foot-tall man named Edward Leedskalnin began moving 1,000 tons of solid coral rock in the Florida woods, completely alone, using a secret he claimed to have stolen from the builders of the Egyptian pyramids. All of this took place in absolute silence. For 28 years, he carved and transported monoliths without a single assistant. His neighbors never heard machinery or saw work crews as the massive 90-ton tower rose above the pine trees. Asked how he achieved this feat, the builder simply replied that he had rediscovered the laws of weight and measure. This claim sounded like madness, but the monuments of our ancestors prove that we are missing something fundamental. Across the dry sands of Egypt, builders erected the Great Pyramid using blocks that weighed up to 80 tons. At Stonehenge, prehistoric people carried 30-ton stones across 30 kilometers of rugged terrain. In Baalbek, Roman engineers hauled 3 massive blocks weighing 800 tons, each to form the foundation of a temple. Yet, muscle alone can't overcome the friction of pulling an 80-ton stone across raw earth. On dry sand, the runners of a heavy sledge dig deep, piling up a wall of grains that locks the block in place. Around 1880 before Christ, an Egyptian tomb painting captured a worker pouring water directly in front of a sledged statue. Historians assumed this was ceremonial. Except they were wrong. During 2014, physicists discovered that a precise amount of water binds sand grains together, doubling the ground's stiffness. Once moistened, the sand prevents the runners from piling up, cutting the required pulling force in half. A task that once seemed to demand a cast of thousands now required only a fraction of the crew. But solving the friction on sand only works if you have sand. Romans in Baalbek faced rugged clay slopes and narrow valleys when they decided to move 800-ton stones. An 800-ton block is heavier than 5 blue whales combined. Dragging such a weight on a sledge would require a team of over 10,000 men, all pulling in perfect unison. Such a crowd would choke the narrow roads and step on each other, making coordinated effort impossible. Engineers typically stop at this obstacle. You can't. Instead of using more muscle, the Roman engineers decided to avoid lifting the stones altogether. Studying the terrain, they noticed that the quarry sat at an elevation slightly higher than the temple foundation. So, they built a massive, gently sloping earthen ramp between the 2 points. Rather than lifting against gravity, they let the slope do the work. Descent control required a network of wooden capstans, which are vertical winches turned by teams of oxen. By wrapping ropes around these drums, a handful of animals could slowly lower the 800-ton block millimeter by millimeter. But this process created a new, terrifying hazard. Should one rope snap, the tension would transfer instantly to the other capstans, causing them to spin out of control and rip the oxen to pieces. To prevent this catastrophe, the Romans engineered a mechanical clutch. The builders carved deep notches into the wooden drums and inserted heavy timber pawls that acted as one-way ratchets. Whenever a rope gave way, the pawls slammed into the notches, locking the system instantly. As a result, the builders could halt and adjust their lines without losing a single millimeter of progress. Even with ramps and winches, steering the stone presented a far greater challenge. A stone that weighs 80 tons can't be turned like a wagon. If you try to turn a long sledge, the runners will dig sideways into the earth, anchoring the block forever. Modern researchers remained baffled by this problem until a retired carpenter in Michigan decided to build his own Stonehenge. Back in 1998, Wally Wallington set out to prove that a single man could move and erect a 10-ton concrete pillar using only wooden levers and gravity. Wallington didn't use cranes or engines. Finding the exact center of gravity allowed him to place a small pivot stone directly underneath it. Balancing the entire 10-ton weight on a single point allowed him to rotate the block with one hand. To move the block across his yard, Wallington used a technique he calls walking. He placed 2 wooden boards under the ends of the block. Rocking the block back and forth like a seesaw allowed him to slip thin wooden shims under the high end, then the low end, gradually raising it off the ground. Once the block was elevated, he could pivot it on its center, rotating it forward by a few inches with every swing. Using this simple rocking motion, one man could move a 10-ton block 300 feet in a single hour. Rather than lifting the heavy weight, he redirected it. This brings us back to the mysterious builder in Florida. When Leedskalnin died in 1951, investigators searched his property for hidden machinery or magnetic devices. They found nothing but simple wooden levers and recycled car parts. He achieved this through a perfect understanding of leverage and the center of gravity. Using a giant tripod built from telephone poles and rigged with chains, he lifted and swung 20-ton blocks of coral with the ease of a man moving furniture. His famous 9-ton revolving gate was so perfectly balanced on a truck bearing that a child could push it open with a single finger. Ancient builders achieved these feats without advanced technology by using something far more powerful. These ancient engineers possessed the patience to study the leverage of wood and the behavior of water on sand. They understood that when you are dealing with 80 tons of solid rock, brains matter far more than machines. The massive stones of the ancient world still stand today because of simple physics applied with infinite patience. Eventually, the gate in Florida stopped spinning when the steel bearing rusted shut, requiring a modern crane crew to lift what one man had positioned alone. Which simple tool do you think the ancients relied on the most to build the wonders of the past?